Paglesham is situated on a peninsula between the River Crouch and Thames estuary. Consequently, a few places within 50 miles of London have retained their rural seclusion so successfully, and there is little to distinguish the village except that it consists of 4 manors: West Hall, Church Hall, East Hall and South Hall. Rounding Ballard's Gore, first we see the old 15th century timbered framed house, previously the Shepherd and Dog Inn. Passing typical flat countryside, soon we see Biggin's Farm, which, many years ago, so the story goes, changed hands over a game of cards at the Punch Bowl Inn. As Church End doesn't appear to be signposted, let us make our way to the Punch Bowl. At the end of the lane is West Hall. Once a moated manor, all that now remains of the moat is on the east and west side. Pritterwell Priory held the manor during the 15th century until it was taken over by the Riches at the Dissolution. In the 17th century, William Wiseman, the first Paglesham branch of that famous family, was in possession, paying rent to the Riches. Today, under very modern methods and management, arable farming is carried on, as well as pig breeding, and from these piggeries have come many a prize-winning porker. Further on, Ingolf's, reputedly named after the Thane Ingolf, a chronicler of Lincolnshire. Once the rectory, it had close connections with the British and Foreign Bible Society. Years ago, members arriving on horseback from their headquarters in London must have needed the services of a local blacksmith. Today, a phone call and the farrier arrives by van. The village forge is gone, but the old skills still remain. Round the bend of the lane, lying well back in a delightful setting, Finches and Moors. Originally a small timbered dwelling, probably a dower house, it was later enlarged and did duty as a dame school. Today, thanks to a perfectly planned addition, it has become a most attractive home in the country. Soon we enter the small high street, which, before the old cottages were replaced, was a perfect example of a 17th century village street. Here, the famous smuggler Hardapple Blythe, the son-in-law of William Dowsett, leader and Robin Hood of the Essex marshes, after his smuggling days, passed his retirement as churchwarden and village grocer. Unfortunately, he had difficulty in distinguishing these two occupations, for he used to wrap up the groceries in pages torn from the church register. Despite his lawless life, he was a devout man, for just before he died, he slowly recited the Lord's Prayer, then quietly said, "Now I'm ready for the launch," and died. Many years ago, a famous violin maker lived here, and outside his shop, he hung his violins to dry their varnish in the summer sun, and such were their magnificent tone that orders addressed to a violin maker, Rochford, Essex, England, arrived from all parts of the world. Today, mine host of the Punch Bowl makes sure that no farmhouses change hands over a game of cards. Just be careful of the traffic in the village, he advises. At the end of the village, we find the church of St. Peter's, the church and the then adjoining religious house, Church Hall. From the top of the church tower, we see land drained and farmed before the conquest, for it was flat and suited the Saxons well. Past here on the River Crouch sailed Canute to the Battle of Ashington. By the side of the church there used to be a cart track leading to the old quay, the base of many a smuggling operation. Now all is large-scale modern farming. Creeping closer across the fields are the skyscrapers of Southend. The village, however, remains unchanged, and trees still soften the landscape. Where once the village was dominated by the church tower, it is now overlooked by a radio mast. For modern farming needs modern methods, and speedy communications are essential. Westminster Abbey let Church Hall first to the Malden family in Stockholm for a rent of £9 per year. After the Maldens, the Warners of Warden Hall in Great Waltham held it. In 1473, it was in possession of John Warner. At the dissolution, the land was taken over by Richard Lord Rich. In 1554 until 1661, it was the property of the Brown family, and they may have well built these lovely old timbered barns. For all through the centuries, the old makes way for new. Where chickens once foraged amongst ox-drawn wooden ploughs, they now scratch between modern farm appliances. Though laborious toil from dusk to dawn is still within living memory, now thanks to the internal combustion engine, office hours can now be kept. Everyone enjoys a christening, and this Sunday afternoon sees a larger congregation than ever. It is worthwhile to remember that many generations of Paglesham folk have trod these paths both in joy and sorrow. While the baby is being christened, let us have a quick look round. Although the church was in existence before 1066, there is now no trace of the original structure. The present building is of Norman foundation, the whole about 90 foot long. The tower is a splendid example of 15th century massive buttresses of flint or pudding stone. But back to the christening party. Leaving Church End, let us look back across the fields to see a village street whose outline has little changed in the last 300 years. No longer children walk barefooted through muddy lanes. School transport is available, and mistress comes by car to school. Built in 1849 by voluntary contributions from the parishioners, in 1872 it was enlarged to avoid the necessity for a school board. Gone too are the pinafores. Drip dry frocks, nylon shirts and blouses are the thing. Cast iron discipline is out, and playtime is really playtime. Here, Oliver Twist would certainly have had no need to ask for more. Yes, you may get down. Don't forget to wash your hands. Where once a bucket of water was sufficient and sanitation was practically non-existent, a modern washroom and toilets are available, though not always used quite so thoroughly as this young lady, who appears to be attempting a soap commercial. Further along the lane, we find modern farm dwellings. Though not so picturesque as the old cottages, they have all the modern conveniences and certainly easier to manage. Little remains of East Hall, except the old bakehouse, for the old hall was pulled down a few years ago. Only part of the moat still remains, and now partially dry. In its place stands a modern farmhouse. Across the fields near the sea wall, says Mr. McVitie, are the old salt pans, last used in Stuart days. They were about 13 acres in extent. Nearby is South Hall. In 1566, Richard, Lord Rich, was in possession, paying a rent of £41, 13 4 per year. Under these roofs and trees lived the Drakes and Nelsons of the free trading world, and no village in Essex, probably in England, can tell more tales of smuggling than Paglesham. In 1870, the Chelmsford Chronicler writes, a large luxel commanded by Dowsett, a notorious smuggler, was brought in this afternoon by Captain Harris. She was taken this morning on the Essex coast, after a chase of 11 hours and smart firing on both sides. The smuggler had 3 men wounded and her hull damaged. Their prize cargo consisted of 2,300 weights of tea and 252 half anchors of Geneva, brandy and rum. The smugglers made their escape by taking to their small boat. In 1778, William Dowsett's craft, the Neptune, armed with 6 swivels and a crew of 11, carrying a cargo of 391 half anchors, 2 holds of brandy, rum and Geneva, 800 weights of tobacco and 2 of coffee, had a running fight with the revenue cutter B. The ringleaders, William Riches and James Anderson, were killed. The remainder surrendered. When these marshes were producing wool in great quantities, the surplus was carried across the channel for sale. Though a capital offence, a return trip with lace and spirits paid handsomely, particularly if protected from the revenue men by John Dowsett's flagship, the Big Jane, armed with her 6 brass cannon. Smuggling was not an illegal sideline practised by the toughs of the village, but an industry in which minister and magistrate took part, and many influential people accepted brandy and lace in return. A hollow left in a brick wall must have hidden many a bottle of brandy or bundle of lace, while the 3 old maids, old pollard elm trees, held many an illegal cask. Paglesham is also famous for its oysters, and here lived Mr. Wiseman, who in 1865 founded the River Roach Fishing Company. It is said that Paglesham oysters were served in the Roman kitchens. Be that as it may, Disraeli certainly enjoyed them. He recalls and writes, They were fit for Roman emperors. At the beginning of this century, 24 oyster smacks were stationed in the river. Only one dredger now remains. In 1565, the Paglesham mercantile fleet consisted of 3 ships with a total tonnage of 8 tons. From then until 1900, shipping increased, and at one time as many as 100 men worked on the river. Oyster dredging today is not a full-time occupation, and fishing must augment the family pot. And what can be nicer than have a trip downriver and to do a bit of trawling on a bright sunny day? Gordon, who made his great survey of Essex in 1594, wrote, "Some part of the seashore in Essex yielded the best oysters in England. The Essex shore is probably half a mile from the Paglesham Point." Where pack trains once stole gently down the dark country lanes, laden with brandy and lace, kitchen gardens are tended, and mesdames take the plunge. At cottages new in 1873, the gardens have reached maturity and show a mass of colour. Where revenue officers once waited in silence, we hear the song of the motor mower. For here the Women's Institute will hold their garden party. In the village hall, many a battle of words have been fought. In the lane, by the side of the plough and sail, some say yes and some say no. Yachtsmen tramp the lane in their sea boots and victual up at the village store. Others get their baccy. Here indeed is a yachtsman's paradise, and a perfect place for messing about in boats. Where preventive officers were on the lookout for the Dowsetts, the Andersons and Hardapple Blythe, and their armed smuggling cutters, today men, women and children climb the sea wall and go sailing, for yachting is now a family affair. Many a sailing barge has left this hard. In 1875, a trotter, one of Eastwood's Kentish brick carriers, was built here. One morning, when the men left her at 6 o'clock to go to breakfast, they returned to find her afloat. She just gained the reputation of being the only barge that no one ever launched. In 1903, when James Shuttlewood took over the yard, a large 140-tonner, the Ethelada, was completed in under 9 months by himself, his brother and 2 boys. Today, fiberglass cruisers have taken their place. And where once manpower was all important, horsepower has taken their place. Few barges now sail up the River Roach to Stanbridge Mill or use Havengore Creek and make the passage, for the heyday of the sailing barge is past. And those that make the trip must wait the authority of the military, as the Shoeburyness firing range lies across the entrance. No longer behind the seawall is the blacksmith forge and saw pit, where every one of the great planks were sawn by hand. Today, Whitstable oysters are more famous, and the pans are little used. Tides ebb and flow. Paglesham is another of those East Coast villages with a glorious past, but uneventful present. Here time appears to slumber, and here young and old can find peace and contentment. But let us return to the village, to that village where the road ends in a bower of tall elms. There we will find that inn, called with rural rightness, the Plough and Sail. For this is the country where men have lived for centuries, with one foot on land, the other in the sea. By ploughshare and ship's tiller, they gained their livelihood.